Okay, great. So kind of some of the things just to help kind of start the conversation was, is we're just going to talk a little bit about kind of how we see people using Rally and sort of the outcomes they're looking to get from their usage of Rally. So what types of views, what sort of insights into how the teams are behaving, and how things are going with respect to the project, and how that's sort of visualized in Rally. So I'd like to kind of take you through some of the sort of standard views. Many of these are focused on sort of the teams are doing Scrum primarily. Most of our customers are. But I'm also going to take a section on reporting, so I will talk about some of the reports that are more kind of specific to Kanban type teams who are going to be looking at a different set of metrics. So we're really going to focus initially on really core charts, core metrics. Hopefully kind of spark some discussion, and you can kind of jump in and ask questions, drive me in any direction you want. I've got access to the tool, of course. I've got access to your subscription, and we can kind of explore that in more detail. Does that sound good? Any other thoughts before we get started? I'll cover a lot of the questions were really around kind of views and reporting, and I know some of your questions are fairly fine-grained. I'll cover as many as I can sort of in the course of kind of stepping through the tool. I have been talking to Justin about your feedback, and we are preparing a detailed response to each of the points that you had raised. So we will get that to you. Great. Just to open, I like to kind of talk about this kind of concept, and we sometimes refer to this as your Rally mirror. And what is Rally telling you? You've got teams working in Rally. They're managing their stories, they're tasking, they're updating their tasks. What information can we get from Rally, from the views that we provide you with? So kind of starting at sort of first going back to almost like first principles around Agile. One of the things most Scrum teams are going to work in sprints, short, typically 2, 3, 4 week time periods, during which they're going to commit to a certain amount of work and deliver that work. And this is kind of the basic building block of an Agile Scrum process. The team is delivering value iteration over iteration. It's a fairly straightforward concept, but can be difficult to implement. So these charts here, kind of the illustration we're showing here is that on the left-hand side is kind of how teams quite often will start in the Scrum process, and on the right-hand side is kind of where you want to get them to. So, from your perspective, if you're looking at, so you've got Scrum teams and you're looking at the burn down charts, especially for new teams who come on board and you're going to be looking at this for the first time, it's kind of like teams are going to go through an evolution in their adoption of the Agile process. And they're not going to get it right the first iteration. So this one on the left here is a classic. And actually, these are the same teams. These are from an actual customer. Their first iteration, as you can see, doesn't tell us very much. There's an ideal burn down line, meaning that they tasked a lot of things, but there's no indication of completeness. Because of that very last day, bizarrely, a huge number of tasks come in and sort of get a spike there. So this is not a view that's telling us a lot. The one below, if you recognize the cumulative flow diagram, I know some people, I think you had one question, there was at least one question around cumulative flow. We'll talk a little bit about that in a bit. But cumulative flow shows us kind of how work is transitioning through states as the iteration progresses. And a lot of these views, we talk about the iteration here, they're also available for the release. So I will talk a little bit about kind of release and release metrics.
The lower right graph shows the team is abandoning work because it's going down the total commitment.
Yeah, so that's a good point. So these charts tell you quite a lot, actually, in terms of how the team is performing. So I'll definitely touch on that point. The upper one is a classic burn down chart. It's also showing burn up of work, so as work is completed. And when we say work is completed, we mean it hits that final accepted state. So it's truly, sometimes in Agile referred to as done. So as part of the way your team works, you should be setting fairly high standards for what done means. It's not just that the code is compiled and checked in, but it's of a high quality, the defects are being ironed out, the testing's being done. the code review is being done, that it's potentially shippable. And so the burn down chart is kind of telling us, it's telling us a couple of things. And in this particular example, this team, I think it was like 4 or 5 or 6 iterations to get to this level. But we're seeing a steady burn down of work. So as the work is completed through the iteration, that's that blue line. It's not always going to track the ideal line perfectly. That's perfectly acceptable, but as long as the trend is towards completion by the end. But then maybe more importantly, they start completing work quite early in the iteration, and that gives you better predictability into whether we're going to be done. And a classic behavior in a lot of teams is that work does not truly get finished until the very last minute, and there's a lot of risk. So this kind of, early completion of work is a real sort of risk reduction strategy.
Why is this to do not hit this one? It looks like there's several hundred hours difference between.
So it would either mean one of two things. One, they finished a tremendous amount of work in that very first day, so that would be optimistic. I would suspect in this case more likely what they did is they brought tasks in from a prior iteration, which were estimated, but either partially complete or complete. So if you move stories in from an early iteration, typically you're actually going to start, with that to-do line is going to be closer to the initial, the first line. In this case, would be like 1,700.
But we're only seeing that if the teams are actually planning the number of hours for every single story at the beginning of the sprint.
So the expectation. So in this case. Yeah, actually, that's a good point. There is kind of there's 2 units of measure going on in these charts. So the burn down is based on task estimates, and so tasks and then in Rally tasks have a special meaning. So a story or a defect represents the work that's being done, either the unit of business value for the customer or the thing you're going to fix. The tasks represent how you're going to go about doing it, and might involve several people on the team. And so we encourage tasking in the context of an iteration to help that team do iteration planning, because by tasking, you're sort of creating a plan for that iteration. 2 weeks of work, here's a set of tasks we're going to need to get done to meet our goal.
Are any teams doing it?
Doing what, tasking?
Are they tasking everything else at the beginning?
Yeah.
John,
not at all. That's one of the weak areas in the teams that I'm working for.
Yeah, our team's not doing that.
We actually view it not only as planning, as a design tool as well. So the rule of thumb is if you cannot break a story into like 1 great task in 15 minutes, it's a story complete.
That's a great metric, and that's a great thing to learn at the beginning of the iteration, as opposed to say in the middle or towards the end of the iteration. And it's, because in the Agile process, we sort of discourage planning in fine detail, too much work too far ahead, because it's potentially wasted effort. But in the context of an iteration, we're doing it 2 weeks, and it's reasonable expectations sort of set. And so we do it not so much to kind of track people's time or to make sure that people are working hard. It's more to help that team. Ideally, at the beginning of an iteration, a team is making a commitment. So we've identified these 10 stories for this sprint. We're making a commitment to get these done in the iteration. Tasking helps us sort of increase our confidence about making that commitment. So it works quite well. And it doesn't. Generally it is the first day of the sprint. You might come into a sprint with tasks already defined, or you may continue to add tasks. I mean that's acceptable. People discover things as they work on things. That's definite. But ideally, you've got the major part of your plan done for the iteration early on, and that way you can track it. And that's a good point. So that top chart is the blue is based on task hours. And interestingly, and you do have to be kind of aware of this when you interpret this chart, the right-hand side is story points. So those 2 scales are different. One is task hours, one is story points. And the right-hand side is representing the accepted work, so that as stories are finished, they'll be counted there. And the reason we like to highlight that is because it points to some kind of, generally good behaviors within the team. If you can accept work during the iteration, it means you've got good product owner involvement, you're able to kind of review completed work, and you know, kind of, rather than waiting until the very last day. Sometimes there's a perception that, well, we watch the demo and then we accept the work. And that's really not how it's supposed to happen. It's supposed to happen earlier than that. So the bottom chart, though, the cumulative flow, this is entirely based on story points. There's no task estimate or task component to that. And for that reason, for some teams who are either not tasking for whatever reasons or just not at that state yet, so even if you don't task, the cumulative flow may still be valuable.
So that looks a little different than the cumulative flow report that I've been using.
Yeah, the one on the dashboard is a little different.
It looks like
Yeah, right.
This is out of the reports.
Yes, that's correct.
And
this you will see in the, if you're in the status page and you click on the
that top.
yeah, exactly, and then I can show you that really briefly.
Okay.
You're
understanding what it is.
You're right. There is a visual difference. We will consolidate those two down to the one.
I didn't realize they were different. That would probably take care of one of my questions.
Yeah.
You don't have access to this graph from the dashboard.
You've got the equivalent. The format, it looks a little different. It's not a bar graph like this. This is based on, this is Flash. It's based on older technology. We're going to eliminate this.
But actually, this is more readable than the other.
You're eliminating this one.
We'll
Okay.
eventually. We're taking Flash out of the product,
So one of my problems is related to this, is that it gets less readable because there's this flip effect on the last day when it's mid-sprint. It's very annoying and confusing for my teams.
Yeah.
I second that.
We're definitely aware of it. It's because we go to zero at the end that produces that. So you almost have to kind of step back one revision.
Well, you should be quick.
I agree.
Yeah, that's an internal spreadsheet to look at, but it's not.
It goes to zero instead of just stopping.
So
So I think Farron and Ray got that we like the older chart better.
Yes.
Well, I like this chart.
yeah. Sure.
I mean, I like the area
at the very
design.
end. Yeah.
I just hate that it has
Zero,
that
yeah, I'm with you, because I was looking at that, yeah.
I never write those, because I would confuse me.
Because this is based on story points, so we often refer to scope, and as you correctly pointed out, in this scenario here, they actually took stories out of this iteration, and so that's the
I
other.
routinely do that, yeah.
Yeah, and it's one of the useful interpretations of this chart, because it will show you kind of the changing scope as the iteration progresses. The bars get taller or shorter. And in a case like this, it is acceptable to retime your iteration. Ideally, you're not doing it on the second or the very last day of the iteration, but it's not unusual. You might hit the middle of the iteration and realize that our to-do is way above our ideal line, and we're not going to get all these stories done in this iteration, so we're going to have to move some stuff out. So you'll see that, and it'll be represented in the chart view. If you want to kind of explore the detail, what do we add or what do we remove from that iteration, there is a view called scope change, which will show specifically, this is a set of stories that got added, this is a set of stories that got removed.
And where is that?
So it is, it's on our dashboard, it's an app, and it's called, it's either called iteration, there's two versions, there's an iteration and there's a release version.
Is there a report in the report section as well?
There isn't. We only deliver that one as an app. And the reason this is important is because, once again, it comes back to a fundamental Agile kind of best practice, is that once the team commits to a scope for the iteration, it should remain fixed. Invariably, things are going to get added, things are going to get dropped, so they should be a very small percentage of your total scope. And so kind of classic sort of problems we see is if that scope changes a lot, then you're diminishing that team's chance of actually hitting their commitment.
Well, from your observation, I'm just curious because you've been observing a lot of different teams. How typical it is to reach this state of the team? Like how many sprints it takes to get there?
Yeah, and I was trying to remember, this was, I think, sprint 5 or sprint 6.
Exactly. So it took us it took us like probably 4 sprints. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, so usually the first sprint, quite often it's the second sprint that's kind of the worst, because the first sprint everybody is really kind of dotting the I's, crossing the T's, and being very, and then by the second sprint it's there's more uncertainty, and and then you get to a steady state. But it's kind of, you have to build that expectation now. It's going to take a few sprints. And kind of to go with this, though, you want to be doing iteration planning. You want to be doing retrospectives, kind of figure out what small incremental changes can we make, to get the next one looking better. So to get to this, there's a whole set of things you need to be doing as a team. So this next one is kind of really around kind of capacity and resource planning. And this is another one, and this is specifically for teams who are doing tasking. So you do have to be doing tasking in order for this to be useful. And once again, this is a team iteration planning tool. Sometimes when people see this, they see capacity and resource planning, they're thinking, kind of more old school, kind of task assignment and tracking people, maximizing utilization. That's not what this is about. This is about team members being able to project their capacity for a sprint. So you can see, basically, the way it works is you select a team, you select a sprint, in this case it's C5, and it's showing, these are all the people who are on the team. So when we say who's on the team, they're either, you set them up in Rally as members of that team, and that's kind of an admin function. So if you think you should be a member of a team and you're not, you can talk to one of your Rally admins and they can make you a team member. They get highlighted in bold in this view. I should actually show you what it looks like in real life. Yeah, so you can see in this case, actually, anybody here, Dave, Paul, Sarah, Tara, and Tom, are all members of this team. They're highlighted in bold in this view. However, other people will also be shown in this view if they own tasks in that sprint for that team. So, and this is a way of, I know it was one of the questions that I think, you have a expectation of a high level of visibility of different teams, and we really encourage that. So, and that can be managed in Rally. You can choose kind of what level of permissions you give people. They can be a viewer in Teams. They can be an administrator, which means give them full access to read, write, delete, edit. I always encourage sort of opening up the permissions in Rally to make sure that people do have full visibility. We really believe in that message of visibility and transparency. But anyway, but there is this concept that you might be helping another team, depending on your role. Maybe you've got a specialist role, or you're in QA, or you're in, documentation, or in marketing. You're helping, prep for an event. So you might have shared roles, and so Rally does support that. But the basic kind of concept here, the important thing is that team members, and we encourage this to be a team member activity rather than a kind of a manager activity. Team members basically get to set their capacity. So for this team, I can give this team this many hours in this iteration. And this is it's a very simple number. It's a very simple calculation. It's basically how many net hours can I give? So net of all the other things you got to do. And typically, if you're fully devoted to a team, it's going to be somewhere between 60 and maybe 70% of your total hours worked that week. But the thing is, the point about this is not for people to kind of come in and say, Tom or Tara is slacking, she's only allocated 62%. We're not trying to maximize utilization. Once again, what we're trying to do is help the team make a commitment to the sprint.
So teams using this they're using it during the sprint. Are they actually doing the tasking then before they're doing their commitment for the sprint?
It's actually, that's a really good point. So there's actually two levels of commitments. There's a commitment based on velocity, and then that's stories and story points. So that's kind of
just more of a commitment to the goals of the sprint.
Correct.
And an initial forecast of stories.
Correct. And then this is kind of a reconfirmation of that commitment. So we took our first commitment, we tasked those stories as we estimated them. People took ownership of those tasks, and now we're comparing it against our actual capacity. So if I was looking down this list, and this is a column of red, I would say, you're kidding. You're not going to be able to make that kind of a commitment. Whereas, in a case like this, there's a bit of a mix. We might rebalance some of the people who are committed. But it's really designed to help the team make that second level of commitment to the sprint. And once again, the evolution you'll see, in this case, this particular team, the first time around, you can see nobody set capacity. I don't think they've done much tasking. And then by kind of 4th or 5th sprint, what we're looking for is a fairly active. And one thing, the goal here is it's not a bookkeeping exercise. It's an individual sort of commitment and also being transparent about your capacity. It's not unusual for people, especially those people who are in the shared roles, to kind of get overcommitted quickly. So this is a way of them saying, hey, I can give your team 10 hours in the sprint, no more. So that's
the team status view.
That's the team status view, exactly. So, and it's always, once again, this is something we don't encourage planning over a very long period of time. It's pretty much a kind of a just-in-time, before that iteration. People's capacity changes a lot based on, everything from vacation schedules to training, et cetera.
I see that this looks like it's by the team and by the iteration. Is there a few, if every once in a while you end up with people who are using part-time for different teams, but it doesn't look like you can see that.
Actually, so in the case where you have a rallying team organization, which you have done at Carbonite, so in this case, I can go up a level. So consumer side is actually kind of a product line. We've got 3 teams under it. So if I go up a level and we're using aligned sprints, so in other words, the sprint boundaries are going to be the same for all teams, then you can use this to roll that information out.
Oh, but what if they have different team names, sprint names? So they could have the same boundaries, but each team has their name.
So we kind of got this. When we design the products, we design it to be project hierarchy oriented, in that you can kind of break out a project structure and create sub-teams. And we want to kind of balance the goal of being able to roll information up so it sort of naturally flows up through this hierarchy. So things like your backlog, your views of defects, test cases, all those things will roll up automatically. But things like iteration and release status roll up based on a convention. And the convention we're using is if you've got aligned iterations. And that requires both the name and the dates to be the same. So
you can't. So in our case, you couldn't do this roll-up because we have teams that end up having sometimes different dates, and even if we align, we end up having different team names, sprint names.
But when you push Android to production and when you push iOS client to production, those don't necessarily align as releases in the Rally sense.
But that's not a release.
It's usually a time box concept.
But this is people in different areas of the company that are using exactly the same iteration.
Yeah, we're not looking at releases.
So that's a little bit different. So, but here's maybe my question related to how we might use this. So if Dave, for example, had a couple of people that were maybe split off on 2 or 3 different teams, because I think he does that a lot. So if he would then wanted to look at how Shane was doing, and whether he really overcommitted Shane, or whether Shane had done that, or Shane was like, is there a way for Shane to then look at how he personally is committed across all of these?
he can. There's an app called My Availability, which you can install on your personal dashboard. And that will show it for Shane. It will show basically, if I look at a line there, well, I don't actually have a capacity here, but if I was Dave and I logged in, I'd see Dave for each of the, in this case, he's got commitments in 3 different teams. And the My Availability app will show him that the number of tasks, his capacity, and his allocation.
But it's only showing him that here because of iterations.
In this example, yeah. In the app, in the My Availability app, it doesn't matter. They don't have to be aligned.
Okay.
So these 3 things were listed. Consumer site had these 3 as such.
That's correct. So the consumer site will have 3 children.
If they don't have.
But if you don't use tasks, this will be the procedure.
Yeah, you don't lose that, but if the team
Mark, can you still see?
Can
you still see?
So, I would definitely like to address that point, though, about alignment, especially around the alignment of the sprints, and separating those the iteration planning boxes from, say, delivery schedules or release schedules. I know this was one of the questions and one of the points of contention. So I think from a kind of an agile process standpoint, there's a lot of value in aligning those sprints and kind of getting an organization aligned around the same schedule, and even as simple as the same naming scheme. And for that reason, so, if, for example, we added a new team to consumer side, their current sprint is, say, Sprint 6. If you had a brand new team forming, we'd actually bring them in at Sprint 6 or Sprint 7 if we're going to do the next one, rather than starting them off again at Sprint 1. And that way you kind of got almost like a common calendar the organization can align to. So when when you've got two teams and you're trying to coordinate dependencies, for example, you could say, well, I need that service in Sprint 7, and it means exactly the same thing to those different teams.
So we call them like bad movie names. So
Yeah.
Taking that fun away because now suddenly
Yeah.
the organization has to choose a bad name or the email.
Everybody could agree that June was a really bad music. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, so there is, that's a great point, because, I mean, especially, in the Agile world, we really believe in a lot of those sort of team kind of ceremonies and team kind of practices, and so what we're trying to do is sort of balance the need for sort of, coordination across teams within an organization, but allow for local optimization, so that,
It could not be, I mean, that's for future, obviously, but it could be not by name, but by date. As long as the different sprints align by date, then you could sum them up.
Yeah.
It really doesn't matter.
So that partially works. The reason we require the same name is that when you're at, like, if I go up to, if I'm tracking iteration status now at the consumer site level, so I'm up here and my scope makes up consumer site plus these three teams. When I drop this down, I'm seeing just kind of one name per sprint. So in this case, iteration 6 represents the sprint plan for, you can see the project names here for the three teams. So the problem is if we allow each of them to have individual names, the pull down becomes exponentially large based on the teams. So we kind of coordinate them that way. But there are some optimizations you can still do at the team level. Your iteration theme you get to set. So kind of what's our overall goal for this iteration, and you can brand it at that point, as well as your planned velocity. So let me come down. Let's come down to the team here. So when we look at this, these are the sprint definitions specifically for this shopping team. And you can see they've got a theme, and they have an individual plan velocity. So this is kind of how much work you as a team expect to get done.
But this assumes that marketing, engineering, anybody that has a plan that has any interdependency has to have the same iteration cycle, name, and everything for the whole company, basically.
So the project organization is a tree. So you can choose to do that alignment kind of pretty much at any branch level.
Yeah.
So it might mean going all the way to the root and making it common across every single team. That might not be practical. Maybe you do it by product line or by division or by organization. And actually, maybe just one further point. So one of the things Rally does support as well, so we talk about iteration planning, we'll support release planning, where release planning is kind of like, it's almost more like mid-range planning. I'm planning not for this iteration, I'm planning for this month or maybe this quarter. So that's what we recommend using releases for. So what we do sometimes have is teams who don't align at the iteration level, but they do align at the release level. So that means, while you don't get the automatic roll-up of iteration tracking, you get an automatic roll-up of the release tracking. So you can kind of do one or the other. Ideally, you do both. We recommend you do both, but sometimes it's hard, because you might have a web services team who do iterations every 3 weeks, and you've got a front-end content team who's kind of pushing new content out every week. And there's no way you can kind of get them to work on the same sprint schedule, but maybe you can align them around releases. A lot of our thinking, a lot of how we set up the tool, really goes back to kind of the early days. We did a lot of work with Dean Leffingwell. He's behind this kind of movement, what he calls scaled agile. So he's got a thing called the scaled agile framework, which is basically a framework for scaling agile across large organizations. And so many of the things he kind of talks about, instead of talking about releases, he talks about what he calls potentially shippable increments. And a shippable increment is a point of alignment across many different teams. So the idea is that as an organization, if you have to coordinate dependencies or you have to coordinate, the integration of the product, you do it around these PSI boundaries, which in Rally would be a release boundary. So just a couple more slides, just to kind of, really talk high level, and then we can kind of, I'm going to quick review of your questions and make sure I start hitting some of them. Velocity is the other thing to track. So velocity is, it's simply a measure of how much work the team is accepting per iteration. And what we want is an upward trend, and it's really as simple as that. And this one on the left is a classic, starting case scenario. The first team, this was the same team that we saw the burn down charts from. The first sprint, C2, I don't actually know what happened to C1, but C2, they accepted nothing. C3, they had good intentions, they planned a lot of work, but they only accepted a small portion of that work. So that the kind of differences between what we planned and what we accepted, the red and green. C4, they kind of doubled down, they planned even more work, and pretty much accepted the same amount of work they accepted in C3. And then by C5, they made a more realistic plan. They missed it by a little bit, but not really. That's exactly what I want to see, from a velocity chart for teams. So this is another thing to watch for. And the reason
how does that capture the fact that you have members coming in and coming out depending on lots of factors? The fact that people are going to start becoming more aggressive and just deciding they're going to start getting used to things and making them smaller. So they do the same amount of work, but they consider them to be smaller stories.
So the kind of the total bar represents that team's commitment for that sprint, and it's going to be measured in the story points scheme that they've chosen to do.
Yeah.
So it is up to the team when they make that commitment to take into account what our resources are. If we have people, we're losing people in this sprint, we need to plan accordingly. We're gaining people, we need to plan accordingly, and that might mean reducing our commitment as much as it means increasing it as you absorb new people. So that has to be a component of kind of what you plan, what you.
But is it in any way divided by the velocity divided maybe by the team's capacity, or is it just if the team suddenly loses 5 of its 10 people,
That's happened.
It's going to shrink to half the velocity, right? But
Yeah.
maybe these 5 people are being actually a lot more effective than before, but the graph will still show a
You can't
slowdown.
really tell that at all, right?
No.
So it's an interesting question though, because so in a case like that, you can explain perhaps a decline in velocity, but you'd still hope to see that they accept their commitment.
Yes.
So a team halves in size. Well, it's going to be committing to less work in the future, but what's really important is, are they accepting what they commit to?
So the percentages over time, and they're the percent that's accepted.
Hitting the goal,
Right.
What conditions generate the pink?
So work that on the last day of the sprint, work that was in the sprint but was not accepted.
We have work that's not accepted, and the first thing we do in sprint planning is we triage that to say that goes back in the backlog. We'll address it later. This goes into the next sprint as ready to test or whatever. And so I'm never seeing the pink, even though we have carryover work of one form or the other every time.
Because
it's not pink, but it's
right. Yeah,
that would be the pink.
Well, I'm not seeing any of that. It shows pink in the key, just like his does, but I'm not seeing any of it, and I don't understand why.
You're moving the whole stories versus splitting them at that point.
Well,
I'm not using the split command.
Because
that was causing some unintended consequences when the team was using that.
It can do that. But you're moving them before the end of the sprint. Is that right?
Yeah. So I have the last day of the sprint is the same as the first day of the next sprint, because we transition, 10 o'clock in the morning. Maybe that's not mean, maybe we should make it so that they're not overlapping that one day. I don't know if that makes a difference in.
Yeah, we have the same problem.
It's funny because we used to explicitly disallow overlapping the iteration that way, and that caused some concerns for people.
So we have
So
the.
now we let you do it, but that could be it.
So I'm not seeing any other bad consequences
Yeah.
of having them set on the same day.
So
except
one
working
thing I
very
would
well.
look at is if you look at your cumulative flow,
Yeah.
perhaps in the status view, you should see kind of, scope, reduction in scope.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The cumulative flow at the end of the sprint looks exactly as I would expect it to look.
Yeah.
I just don't understand why you have pink and I never see that.
I have pink right here.
You do, so what's the condition that's different?
What's my chart different?
The difference is that you have child selected in the project dropdown, the project
So you're
picker.
seeing it across projects, yeah.
So you're seeing the sub-project for QA regression.
The problem we have is that we start planning at 9 a.m. People in Kiev have had almost a full day of work, so we don't want to kill the sprint the night before. You want to kill it when you start the planning.
Here's some of your roll-up.
So it seems like the rally should allow you to say, we do our planning at this time of day.
Right,
and
it's
that's
better
when
if
you
it's
can
time of
roll
day.
out.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's a couple things happen there. The time zone is the time zone of the workspace. The iteration basically starts at 0000 on the kind of the first day of the sprint and ends at 23, 59 at the end of the sprint.
Yeah, that doesn't work for us. If we can have QA accept stories at 3 a.m. our time because they're still completely in the sprint.
There's an idea of other tools that I've used where you have a release button that actually says sprint stop now, and then that asks what's left over, you push it to the next sprint, et cetera. So you manually are saying, I'm stopping, versus some arbitrary date that's
Although the
set
teams
in
are
there.
very consistent, like their team starts at 10 o'clock is when the cutoff is, and 9 o'clock is when the cutoff
I
is.
don't know if we had an hour in,
Right, so both those choices would make sense,
Yeah.
yeah.
But
But it does mess up our.
But you would want the release button because the iterations are designed to be able to sync, and the teams couldn't be planning on the same day but at different hours. In Rally, if you had time right? Because you're trying to have all the dates be absolutely synchronized to the minute.
Well, as I said, I'm not seeing any problem
Yeah.
with the tracking by having them starting in the same day.
you just can't use this chart.
You can't use the
I
chart.
can use that chart, but I don't get the pink stuff.
I think what you'll see in that chart, you'll get the green to show you the accepted, which
Yeah.
honestly.
But it doesn't show you how the team is failing to meet its commitment or overachieving.
That chart, it does not show that.
Correct. So the chart is part of it.
I think, so I'm going to take a bunch of kind of things to sort of follow up on. That's one I'd like to look into in more detail to explain it more fully. But at a minimum, you could certainly use it in combination with your cumulative flow to kind of,
Right.
I guess the real point is using some of these kind of visualizations and these metrics to, they're kind of retrospective items. So at the end of that sprint, if you hit what we want to see you do is kind of when you get to the end of that sprint, you do your retrospective, and you kind of, as a team, you kind of say, well, hey, we planned 100 points of work, and we had to carry 40 of them over to that next sprint.
Yeah.
That's what we want you thinking about, why did that happen? Why did we miss our commitment by, 40 points? Is it because new work came in during the sprint? Is it that, when we started working on it, we discovered all these additional tasks? And then as a team, sort of, kind of, what's the learning from that, and how can we apply that to the next sprint that gets better? That's what we really, kind of want you to do.
One of the things that I found that's different between Jira and Rally reporting is when we did our stand-up, at the end of the stand-up, we always showed, I've talked to Justin about this, we always showed sort of the burn down of stories, and it was against a line, and you could see good, bad, and the whole team would get okay, we really need to work on it, or we don't.
Yeah.
What we see when the team, or what I see when the teams look at the iteration, it's more analytic, but there's no, okay, it's good, okay, it's not good, it's like, so I'm
We're
wondering.
missing that target line.
Right, so because there's no
Which
clear
you
target line, And because even if you're tasking, you're really not going to hit the target line because people change the tasks as they go, whatever. You really get a kind of feeling. So I'm wondering if there's a way we could do something that was more crisp.
Yeah.
Because that is kind of good to get a thumbs up. We're hitting it, we're running ahead, we're running behind. We kind of get okay, stuff's happening, the team kind of on.
Because we don't do hours, but we don't have to see the hours of below or above.
Yeah. Well, and I think, so one of the things, Jill, we talked about this the last time, we were limited in our capability to give you this type of chart, but where you just, or in fact, I think one of the things we do was task counts, so even if you don't estimate your tasks, at least if you define tasks and have some way to measure the completion of those.
Yeah.
That's the type of chart we can now create because with a new analytics engine under Rally, we can kind of get that data on a per day basis. So that's one thing that I mentioned to Justin just before the meeting started. That's one thing I'd like to kind of circle back with you and look at.
Because I thought maybe the team would get better at it, or maybe I'd see it differently. And what I see is the team does a good job at analyzing, and that's thoughtful, but they don't get a thumbs up or so or down. They kind of get interesting kind of feel. So that's very different than
Yeah. So they're only defining stories and defects. But are you sizing them? So do you have story points? They're pointed.
Yeah.
Okay.
All the teams seem to be pointing. I'm seeing, a lot of the teams are not using the tasking yet, and I think there's a lot of benefit to it, and some just maybe want to move the teams more towards it. But Carnes isn't using it.
Well, it means we'll have to spend hours in sprint planning.
I'm sorry, why are you saying Currents isn't tasking?
I didn't see them looking at the boards here.
They task not as much as the server team, but they task when the team decides how to task out a story.
Okay, I just
and they don't task defects, which in this particular sprint they have more than.
In this current sprint, so that was all I looked at, the current one, just to see what they were doing.
Okay. So given time, it's 11:55, and I know that there were a lot of questions that people had. How do we want to sort of? How do we want to manage? How do we want to manage that?
Do you want to at least open up the food and kind of people can start?
Yeah. So there's 4 salads in there. So if you're a vegetarian, there's 2 Caesar salads with nothing, and then there's 2 or 3 apple salads because I know John and I are fans. And then a bunch of sandwiches.
I have a question about Rally. One of our challenges has been that I don't know how to say people don't like it when the team spends a lot of time in planning. They find that it's a waste of time.
A lot of time in
planning. Which means really understanding the story to the level where you can create. Where you can create meaningful subtasks. It doesn't make sense if you just say, well, I'll create that, and say, well, I committed to these subtasks, but I don't know what the subtasks are, right? It takes a long time to figure out all the details of what subtasks have to be, to actually commit to it and meet. So does Rally have a way of helping teams be efficient at breaking down the story? Is there a tool for looking at stories and going from story to acceptance criteria to the task in an efficient way, or is it something you end up having to do somewhere else and just scribing into Rally afterwards?
I mean, you can do it directly within Rally, and particularly in the iteration status page. It's pretty efficient to you can treat tasks, sub-elements of the story, and kind of just keyboard shortcuts, and you can actually work through it pretty quickly. So I think the mechanics are there. I'll touch on them, briefly, just to make sure you kind of know the best ways of doing this. I think the bigger thing then is the process around this. And then a couple of things that will help, so we don't encourage you to kind of have stories where the tasks are boilerplate copies of other stories. There should be, the tasks are meant to be quite specific to the story, but it's not unusual for them to be fairly common tasks. across stories, and there's like a copy task front capability where you can say,
Yeah.
you know, we've got maybe 3 or 4 common tasks that we do for every story. You know, we do a code review, we do a design review, we kind of standard things. And so you can set them up in a story and then just copy from there and you get those tasks each time.
So you have a notion of sort of template?
It's effectively a template.
Wow.
We don't
Can we adopt it?
He just told you to just copying from one story to the next, that's something, not see
but no, the thing I really meant, like if you move story to stream, can you automatically create tasks like templates, like empty tasks?
Yeah, let me show you. It doesn't quite create them in, fully automatically, but it, good catch. So, for example, let's imagine this story here, purchase your items, is going to be our template. It's got 6 tasks, or 7 tasks against it, or 6 tasks against it.
Yeah.
And
It's okay, yeah.
And then, so if we then had a new user story, so I'm just going to inline add a new user story. So I'll call it my new story. Once you've done that, so if you were creating tasks individually, you can create them right from here. Hopefully you've seen this, but if not, and then I can start to create tasks, save and use. You've already know that. But then this third button here is copy tasks from.
Okay, good.
And if I select that, then it lets you search for your story. You could call it template or something like that. You find it easily. There's my story, purchase your items. So I select it and say copy tasks. And now this story will have the 6 tasks against it.
Okay, thank you.
So you would want in the same state.
So you would want.
Well, in this case, yeah. That's only because I took
the template one, they would all be compliant.
Exactly, and then they might not be owned as well. But in some ways, it might be helpful. If the same person is going to do that same task every time, you could actually define the ownership up front. You could even define the estimate. So this should take about 3 hours or 2 hours. If you do that in the template, the copy will get those values, and they'll be stashed and kind of ready to go. Now, the other thing, we just introduced this fairly recently. The other way to kind of look at your iteration is the iteration tracking board. And this is a new view. It's intended to give you a more board-like view of Sprint. But you can quickly access your tasks right from the card. So if I select this and then click on it, you can see it will pull up my list of tasks here. I can update them, I can add new tasks, etc. But it'll hide them away otherwise and just give you a little summary to say what percentage is done. How many hours remaining?
How do you get those tasks to show up on the board? So, because there's tasks that are not in progress, there's tasks over here. So, do you have the tasks show up?
No. The idea is that you can explore. If I want to see some recent purchases, what are the tasks for? Then I can click on it and display them. But it's meant to kind of hide them until you need them.
A board should be able to have. Thinking you should be able to move the tasks across, but you actually can't use the store for that, right? You can only move stories that are in progress, and all the tasks you still have to manually go in and move.
For this board, yeah. There's actually a task for this one.
So I could see that if you were tasking, that this would be a good screen to use during stand-up, actually. Just keep changing the filter by for each person that's giving their status. And that way, if it's a QA person giving their status, they would get all of the tasks associated with their work.
Well, actually, but there's a couple of things as well here in that you can, you more than likely you're going to be focused on that in-progress column. So these are the things, we're currently working. So you can sort of scan down that column pretty quickly.
So the task board you're talking about shows the story and the task?
Correct, yeah. And in all these cases, it's the exact same data, it's just different views of the same data. If I update it in one place, it's updated in the other.
Is that designed to be a Kanban board?
It's designed, yeah. It's a precursor to what will be our new Kanban board. It's going to use the same. The differences are that uses an iteration schedule space. A Kanban board can be based on, you can can define any fields and your own complete set of common law states for it. Yeah, so this is the task board. So the stories in this case are down the left. They don't change their representation. They're always going to be shown on the left there. These are the tasks for those specific stories, and then they can be...
But on this page, it'd be nice if I could click on the story and get more detail, because you can get no detail about the story.
I've never used it.
Oh,
Right? You click on, there's nothing. If you click on the thing on the left, there's no action.
oh, you can't open the story from this window at all.
So this task board, is this not released?
This task board is actually a fairly old view. I'll be honest, I would expect us, I expect it to go away in favor of a task board based on our new board technology, which is what the iteration tracking board is. And certainly within the iteration tracking board, all those things become, these all become linkable, so if I want to go into that story detail, I can just click on this header, and there you are.
I don't see the iteration tracking board either.
So in your view? Yeah, so it's, it can be installed individually or for the workspace. And it's...
You might say add at the bottom, somewhere usually in the...
New page?
Yeah.
Page? Is that what that means?
Yeah.
Page, and then you can pick it.
And then you have to go through a series of steps to do that.
So,
Or just even those.
are these something that you can actually install for everybody?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so and we're just making the point, Eric was making the point, we can install that in your subscription and share it, so everybody will have this, rather than having to each install it individually.
About sharing, one of the things that I stumbled across earlier was that I talked to someone who was in a totally different team, and they say, oh yeah, we solved that problem, and it was in that story. But I couldn't see it because I didn't have permissions. It seems to me that everybody in the organization should be able to see what anybody else in the organization does. That's the story, the task. Because you might have comments. You might say, oh, I did that. I fixed that. Or I helped you. Or you might search for someone who did something like that in Rally.
Yeah, so...
is there a way of opening it?
There is, yeah, there is. It's and it works both ways. Some organizations are more locked down than others. Personally, I agree with you. I really believe in that, much more open transparency across teams. The sort of, beg permission or beg forgiveness rather than ask permission model. So I definitely would encourage that. But you can do it. But some organizations are more locked down and they want that ability to kind of at the team level say who can update or if they can even see this data. And so Rally's, the permission mechanism is pretty powerful. It allows you to do that.
So we've locked it down as a result of some errant mistakes that have been made by people thinking that they were in their own workspace. And one of the issues is that most of the people hadn't had a conversation with Barry, so they're using the tool and doing things with live ammo. And we adjusted things backwards so that it was kind of like, okay, we went from 50 seats to 100 and some odd seats, like almost overnight. And the next gen team, the current team, server team, they all went through training within like 3 to 4 weeks of being in Rally, and then the back half of the other people didn't really have sort of a sense, and so stuff was happening, and it's like, okay, why is that happening? And it was like, oh, I was on the wrong project, I'll fix that later. So we made that
reopening, because I thought what is important mostly is reading and commenting. Okay, I should be able to put a note or a comment or whatever is the right methodology in there. So I can say, oh, I have an idea, I can help you on that. You can put a note in there, or add a note saying, oh, I did this in this other story, here's a reference to how I did in this other story. So not necessarily adding tasks to somebody up to a team on that level.
Just actually on that point around kind of discussions and commenting, hopefully you saw the new feature we just introduced this last week. So we're making discussions more prominent in more of our views. So you can immediately see this one here, first thread, 3 comments.
Oh, that's much better.
Yeah, if I click into that, it'll show you what the comments are. And then you can jump in and kind of add a comment to it.
So, quick question, Barry. In order to give to Ron's point, right now the restrictions are there's no access, you're an editor or a team member.
A viewer.
Sorry, a viewer, team member, or no access. But to do what Yvonne's saying, right, being able to comment.
To add a comment, you need editor permission. You don't have to be a team member, but you do need editor permission to that project.
Which effectively is just full access.
Which is full access.
And that to me is cause for, people should be able to make comments, but Vaughn's not going to do this. If someone might say, oh, well, this is not what I understand to be, when you start moving things around in a sprint, you're not on that team. You have that ability. I guess the real question is, we just have to
limited access mode or something.
No, or if you want to just discuss something, you just send a note to whoever the owner is and go outside the school.
No, I mean, because the new discussion access is fantastic. I mean, to me, it's like that's kind of really what you want, to get away from the noise of email. I mean, if you're able to make a comment on the next gen piece or something about RFA or something like that, then you should just be able to drop in a comment.
If bug occurs, I have the same bug, and that was my condition on which I reproduced it.
Sure.
Yeah, I think variation on the same thing, which was actually very aggravating to me. Let's say I want to show my dashboard to, let's say, project management. So I have only one way of doing this, so I need to ask Eric or Justin or to create this shareable dashboard. And after that, I have no way to modify it. If I take my own dashboard...
Well, you do. You have an agile coach that is by your side.
I know, but that's not ideal, because I want to pick this dashboard constantly. I'm looking at different things. And you guys are helpful, obviously. So if I take my own dashboard, I cannot share. So that's unacceptable, because I should be able to share my own dashboard with other people. Yeah. But there is no mechanism to do it as far as I know.
Yeah, so we kind of, the dashboard functionality has evolved, and actually, a lot of new functionality has been added in there. It started off with kind of personal dashboard. I can set up my own dashboard and, configure it any which way I wanted. And then, very people want to be able to share those dashboards. So what we said is if you were a workspace admin, you could create a dashboard and share it with everybody in the workspace, and that becomes an item on your menu. I think what you'll see the evolution of that, and I'm hoping it will happen this year, is that will allow you to name the dashboard and then sort of choose who you share it with.
Can I ask you
right now it's kind of a Boolean, shared or not.
What does it mean admin for workspace? Can I be admin for my own project?
You can be admin. The admin is at the workspace level.
What is workspace like?
The workspace is effectively is Carbonite. So
the whole thing. Okay.
Yeah. So it's Eric, John, me. Eli is because he's on the product team. So he may or may not have known that, but he is as well. So the reason why we made that adjustment is because when we were creating a shared view, when we were creating the dashboard for your team, if everyone goes in and creates a dashboard, then that navigation, which is something I was talking with Barry, there's no way to cleanly, it sorts by how it gets created. So if people just create a bunch of dashboards, we could have 30 different dashboards, and you're like, okay, I just want to see the 3 that are relevant to me. And the only way to maintain shared dashboards that sort of have a cross need by multiple people is to limit who can share them.
Yeah, it seems like there are several patterns related to requirements. Obviously, I would love to own my own project in combination with Agile Coach and Scrum Master. I would like to be able to share my dashboard.
So I think we'll definitely take care of the dashboard issue in terms of that ability to kind of name this and share it with a smaller set of people. The kind of the workspace project thing is once again it's kind of a balancing act in that we have that option to kind of give everybody complete project configurability. The problem with that though is you get a divergence of configurations, which makes it very difficult to, A, it adds to administration, but B, it makes it harder to kind of create a sort of a rolled up view that makes sense. And so the workspace model, it sort of trades complete configurability off against a consistent and generally fairly easy to administer model. And so especially for large organizations, that's really important. But we have started to introduce levels or aspects of project configuration. So for example, the Kanban board can be configured at the project level. And then this year we introduced the ability to define your custom fields and choose the visibility at the project level. So you define a custom field in the workspace, but then individual projects can say whether they want to see or not. So that allows you to, if I want to capture some more information, but just for my team, it doesn't show up in everybody's project now. So I think you'll see that. As I said, we do that balancing act, and we'll continue to add project-specific stuff where it makes sense.
You can give, like I'm joking, but you can give an access to everybody and drive it like from external point of view to URL. So like restrict access to project level for like basically basic identity access management. One-on-one. Yeah, it's good doable.
Yeah. The other big thing, I don't know if there's any answer from Mondays, it's different, but what we did a lot in Jira was that you end up getting familiar with the number, for instance, US 3497, and that's what you throw around to people. And you're writing an email to someone, and you could be on your phone here, and say, oh, I'm working on US 3790. There's no way, it doesn't link automatically. I can go, somebody else could open the browser and start typing, rally dot, and then already it says, in Jira, when they browse, and you just put the new number, and it would show up.
Well, there's a search box. You can type the number in.
Yeah, so you have to open the website, type in the search box, wait for the result.
There's
two loads, which is slow. No.
Yeah. It won't work on your phone, but there is a Chrome plugin which will allow you to kind of punch in a rally story or task or defect ID and have it search for it. Basically, what it does is it front ends the search box. So. Actually, let me do it on my demo environment, not yours. So, if I do a search for S132, it'll take me right to that story. Or if I had searched for a view, for example, we've got our list. The search is linkable in that. So, for example.
Isn't that a URL right there that's going directly to that story?
It is, yeah. So it doesn't contain the actual.
URL
it doesn't contain the ID,
so
yeah.
The ID.
But it is a
unique number, so it's just harder to use. It's a little more. It's an extra step to use.
So it's certainly a unique URL to the item. So it's nothing to share. It's it's unique across workspaces, etc. But I think what actually I was trying to demonstrate was we do have a full response on all the things you've brought up with us to complete, and I'll include it in there. But there is a way, basically you can do a search, and if you give it something like, I think it's keywords equals keywords.
Oh, you have to do all your searching in the URL?
Well, no, not necessarily. You can search right from your search box there. But I think if you wanted to share the results of a search with somebody, this is what you can send them. Okay. Something like that.
You're saying there's a Chrome plugin you can actually...
Yes, there is. And I'd have to be reminded of exactly where it is, but I'll
One thing, so something we get to look at is general health checks, like what reports you suggest we look at the health of the...
The problem you can find the crossover in bug reports.
Yes, I also wanted to discuss bugs, because I'm actually a little bit confused how to deal with it.
Sure.
Yeah, even down to why bugs don't show up when you're looking at your user story, unless they're at the top level.
Yeah, that's...
You have to do a toggle to see bugs versus just see bugs with the text.
That's one issue. Second issue, very specific issue. Let's say if I have several bugs in the current sprint, I wasn't convinced that overall view, like report of release-related bugs, actually showed the count. So I was really confused. So let's say people created like 3 or 4 bugs, like a 5.0, and then I looked like in my dashboard, because in my dashboard I have like bug summary. I wasn't even sure how this counts. I was convinced that the counts are wrong.
Yeah,
so I was...
let me talk a little bit about this, because it is a fairly common point of confusion. It also points to some of the kind of the capabilities of defect tracking in Rally, and the main thing about defect tracking in Rally is that defects kind of
Are we off mute? Back on recording?
The conference has been unmuted.
Good, we should be good. Thank you. As always, I always want to be reminded. So the kind of the thing about defects is they kind of have two lives in Rally. A defect has a life cycle of its own, just like a story does, and that it can be it's a backlog item. We can rank it, we can estimate it, we can plan it into an iteration or release to be worked on in that iteration or release. But it can also be associated to stories. So if you're in an iteration, you can log defects against a story, and that kind of creates a traceability, and there's a lot of value in that. But the thing is, and this is what catches people, is that just because you log a defect against a story doesn't mean that defect is also in that iteration. By default, in fact, it goes into the backlog. And the reason for that is that you might, if you log a defect against the story, you might be making a decision that perhaps this is a minor thing. We can accept our iteration even with this defect in place. But I've logged the defect and I want to fix it in the next iteration, or I want to fix it in the next.
But it's not Agile. The whole point of Agile is that when you're done, you're done. You never have to revisit it again.
I agree. However, there's degrees of.
Yeah.
For example, would you stop the release of a major feature if there was a spelling mistake in the documentation?
Ideally, you want to fix it immediately. But my question actually was the other way around. I do see these bugs sorry interrupting you, but it's important.
Yep.
So that's the original question. So I do see these bugs in the Spring backlog. It seems like people who created them decided to Spring, that's what I wanted them to do, and I wanted them to fix immediately. So the question is, then I looked at the release view of all bugs. I see only counts, and I don't think counts have been updated. So that was my confusion. So the fact that you create bugs in the Spring doesn't mean that they should show in the old release count.
So I guess there's two things there. So I talked about the defect. So maybe just to kind of show you the mechanics of it. So we're looking at this is the plan for Sprint 6. Let me collapse that. I've toggled it to the defect mode. These are all the things we're currently planning to work on in this sprint. And it includes defects. You can see there's a story with two defects. There's some stories. But there's also some other defects that we've logged against the story, but aren't necessarily planned in the current sprint. Now, at the time I created that defect, or in fact I can go back in and edit it, I can say I want to immediately plan this defect into release 2 iteration 6. Now, by doing that, this is part of the scope. In my scope change, it'll show up in the cumulative flow. It'll show up in the status page. Notice how VE22 is now in our sprint plan as well.
Why would it end up in the scope change? Because it could be that simply QA is working in different hours than engineering, and they say, I tested your story, the story is not accepted, so the story is not done. I'm not growing the scope of the story, I'm saying you didn't implement it correctly, you didn't meet the acceptance criteria. It's a bug, it should be fixed in this sprint in order to accept the story. It shouldn't grow the scope of the sprint, it's part of the scope of the sprint that acceptance criteria should be met.
So it does depend on kind of what you do with that defect. If you estimate it, and plan it as a sprint, we'll show that as a scope creep.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
I mean, as far as the task.
Well, so remember to make the distinction. If you task that defect, certainly it's going to be part of the burn down. If you don't task it, but do estimate, it will be part of the scope for that sprint.
But if it's tied to a story and represents the acceptance criteria for a story in that sprint,
but
I think it would just be wrong to give it points.
Well, think about it. But think about how you track. So in a release, a very common problem is that as the release goes on and you get towards the end of the release, there's an accumulation of defects in the technical desk that needs to be kind of burned down by the time you get to the end of the sprint. So if you do point it and we show a scope change, when you look at your release cumulative flow, you'll see it go like that. And you'll see the range broaden between what's accepted and what's kind of not accepted or in progress.
But that's because you accepted stories, but you found bugs after having accepted the story.
Right.
If you haven't accepted the story because you found a bug associated with the completion of that story, it shouldn't be scope creep. It should be that story isn't done yet because I found a problem with the way you implemented it.
Right, and then that's what it does. There's another kind of variable to that. It's kind of whether you choose to estimate that defect or not. If you don't estimate the defect, then it's going to show a scope or scope change.
Correct. Yeah, and I think we all agree here that if it's part of the user story you're working on, you don't estimate it because that was estimated by the story.
The issue is defaulting to the
not being part
of the sprint when.
I think that's good. So it forces a triage.
No, it's actually, in my opinion, it's actually really bad. But again, we can argue.
Well,
I think you answered my question. So people forget to assign immediately to this sprint, and that's why these bugs are nowhere to be reported.
Yeah.
So they're actually working on it in the current sprint, but they escape overall release report, which is not a big deal. But now I know.
Yeah, maybe I'll clarify that. So you're right. In the views that are scoped to an iteration or a release, they won't appear. That's absolutely correct. There are some other. There's for example, there's a defect trend chart, which is kind of it's just for the team. It should show them.
Okay, now you actually explained it to me, so we just need to include it as part of training to people, because I wasn't aware of it at all.
You have to manually assign.
For me, it was so like,
Hey Barry, that Chrome thing's really cool.
Oh, you found it? Okay, excellent. Okay.
What is it?
You can share it with
Chrome.
He'll share it with you later.
Yeah.
Chrome.
But it's only for Chrome, there's not going to be any other.
Oh, the Chrome thing.
All right, thanks Barry.
If I'd known that, Eli,
Eric was Safari. Eric loves Safari. I wasn't an accusation. I was just saying Eric likes Safari.
I've been converting to Chrome even,
Yeah, I'm like you. I have all three browsers.
I use a cloud post.
So,
All right, where are we in our agenda?
well, so
So keep in mind it's 12:28. I reserved the room for the extra half hour till 1. Barry has to leave at 1.
actually, it's great. I just got a text message from Sean saying my afternoon meeting had rescheduled. So my afternoon's free.
Okay, so Barry is here longer. We only have the room till 1.
Yeah. So I'll plan.
How long do you really want to be beat up?
Well, we can always find another room or another space.
Well, I need to work on my burn down.
Get your hours in with.
That's great.
So I know Dave, because I know Dave was or I guess you had sort of Kanban sort of questions.
Yeah.
You probably want to get that answered sooner rather than later. And then Analytics 2.0, I think Yvonne and, you probably want to know about that. Eric's already left, but Analytics 2.0 I know is something that they'll find helpful because it's that larger picture of how things are going.
I don't know how things are going.
I don't know what Analytics 2.0 means.
Well, he does though. That's the point. He can demonstrate it to you.
So, and Jill specifically asked about health checks. So, I'd like to. So, Kanban, health checks.
I'll let you guys do that then, and I'll leave. Like the shop.
What are it?
A lot more done.
Thanks a lot. It was very informative.
Great meeting.
Do you have all your questions answered that are sort of in the medium term? Barry's going to reply back to the email that Jill and Eric, but I suspect most of them got answered, but if there's anything pressing, I want to make sure that gets answered.
Yeah.
I still have an open question about the best practice for planning the release target based on a release scope.
Oh, what we
and
do.
velocity for the team.
Yeah, the one thing I would have on top after yours would be really this notion of releases.
Yeah.
Because we have a clear, in my brain at least, I have a notion of what a release is. It's not a time box. It's the software we want to put out the door once certain stories are done and bugs are fixed, and that's what the release.
Yeah, right.
You're talking about push to production.
Yes, push to production.
Push to the store.
Yeah, that's production.
Yeah.
And so, one thing I've been kind of discussing with some of my colleagues is that, so we kind of came from the agile planning background, so this idea that we do, and part of what I talk about this like kind of Dean Leffingwell model is that as an organization you plan releases, with the goal to do sort of mid-range planning, kind of, the planning for the next quarter is very typical, or maybe 2 months. And I suppose in some ways it's unfortunate we call it release, because release has the connotation that it's a software release or a software version almost. And in general, that model has worked well for us in a world where people deliver maybe every 2 months or quarterly. But as now as we've come full circle to a much more sort of continuous model, I think we do need another additional concept in the tool to represent an actual software version or a deployment. And so I've actually been having a lot of these conversations with my colleagues. We really believe the mid-range planning model still works and it's still important, but as an organization you do want to be kind of doing sort of general quarterly planning, fine-tuning that into iteration planning, then allowing you a way to sort of capture, well, as part of this sprint we did 3 builds that we pushed to production. What were in those 3 builds?
Yeah.
And so, I'll be honest, we don't have a perfect answer for that right now. And the suggestion is to use tags, and I'm aware of the drawbacks with that approach. I'm aware that scope to the workspace,
because it's almost backward in the sense that you might work on 3 or 4 things, and the product owner might say, "Good, let's release that." You didn't plan on releasing. The build number only shows up the time you release it, not while you're working on the story, right? And so you want to be able to say, the way we work on it today is you go in source control.
Yeah.
You say, in source control, I release this revision number, and what are all the check-ins that came along with it, and every check-in has the story number on it.
Yeah.
We can't do that right now in SDN with Rally, by the way. That's another issue that I think is in the email, that I want to be able to see the list of stories and click on any of them and see the description and the details from the SDN report of what was checked in that release.
Yeah. So and that's because we do have an SDN connector, but you're not using it right now.
I asked Justin if he could follow up with Sean or manage that, because I think it's for all teams, not just our team.
Right.
Well, you and fewer teams using SDN, so
fewer teams, but
But the
actually, you're right. I recall the conversation now. So we certainly support it for Subversion. We support it for Git. And my understanding is you're now using it kind of essentially an on-premise or an in-house version of GitHub. Is that right?
So I'm not a team that uses Git.
And the thing is actually that and then I think subsequent to that conversation, we released an integration for GitHub, and then that integration can be built. There's a little bit of work to be done with your in-house version. So it can be done. It absolutely is done in the Subversion world. And so one of the things we do, which kind of I think helps complete this picture, is that if you use a Subversion connector, then Rally knows about the kind of the change sets.
Yeah.
Their association to items in Rally, so it can be tasks or defects. And we have a build integration. So if you're using, for example, Jenkins in particular, our build integration will basically see the set of change sets, go, these are associated with things in Rally. I'm going to create a build object in Rally, and that build object then has a link to all the change sets.
So my question is, if the way we did it with SDN and Jira is when I'm checking in, I say, I put the story number in my check-in comment.
Right.
And the SDN plugin or Jira, I'm not sure how these things actually work, but they pick up immediately on that, and the word I typed in is now a link. Does that work with the Rally? Can I put my US 3497 in my check-in, and now Rally or SDN will pick it up as a link to Rally?
Yes. So basically, that's the way our integration works. It fires the post-commit hook in the Subversion server. So it gets the commit, it examines the message, it looks for something that it thinks is a Rally ID.
Yes.
It goes out to Rally, verifies that it is a Rally ID, and then creates a change setup for the item in Rally. So then from Rally you can kind of see, well, this story, here's the list of check-ins we made for this story. And you can even link back to source code viewing tools. But then when you build it, we can also then kind of roll those things up into a build object. And then so this build object is kind of a set. So this, so instead of say per story sort of saying this is part of deployment X or build X, if we could get that integration working for you, then we can pull that information out based on your actual builds.
Yeah. Okay.
So it feels like that's something that we should follow up with I should follow up with you and kind of really delve into kind of what your current environment is and can we do an expression. I know some of your teams use Bamboo.
We moved away. Okay. Yeah.
I've heard worked with Bamboo in the past, so I think we can make it work.
That's the team that Yvonne's on, and then
No, we don't
Team
want to
Eric
use
is working with.
It's not using Bamboo anymore.
Yeah, we're done with Bamboo.
They give it-
Okay, but Barry's basing his
Yeah.
comments on history that we've had, conversations over time. So it's not that's a recent change, right?
Yeah.
So I guess the question then, Barry, would be then if we can work together based upon the questions that have been raised, and then we'll just come up with a basic backlog and we'll prioritize what we think is most appropriate given your time, because I know you've done some help for us, but we have yet to hire a tools engineer here to help us do some of the things that you have done as part of your work with us. So this might be one of those things that's, the top three.
Yeah. Well, it feels like it's causing you some pain, and I'm definitely aware of this sort of the juxtaposition of what we call a release and what you're actually calling, what is essentially a software version, and kind of bridge that gap. And perhaps this integration will be the ideal way to do it. Because one would be automated, but you wouldn't actually have to kind of go in and tag each story individually.
But still, would we be, with what you're envisioning, able to view it in Rally? Because right now with the team I'm working with, there's a lot of just constantly stacked. One goes down, one goes up, and there's an overlap as something's being released, something else is coming out, or different people take the privileges. So the thing that makes it even more confusing is the backlog, the release backlog changes as you change the choice, but nothing else does. So it's sort of changing things, but not really.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that's from a planning perspective. What you would see is that your release status, your track release status would change as opposed to that, as based on the operations you make. But in the planning page, it doesn't change, and that's because we're showing you the complete plan for that iteration, which includes things from potentially different releases. So I think Tom made the point that continue to use releases in Rally as that sort of mid-range planning tool to help you do monthly or bi-monthly or quarterly planning. And let's figure out the kind of the version issue in another way.
So one thing that I found was very useful with the product owners in the past is they send an email saying, these are the list of stories I'd like to see fixed, and those are the bugs I'd like to see fixed. Once that is done, we can release, right? So it's not based on time, it's based on when these things get done. So in your release, the release backlog, sounds like a good place where you can put that in, saying I want all these stories and these bugs as part of this release, but it's not based on a time frame again. It's based on as soon as you're done, we're done.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And then in the sprint, you might have Android things you're releasing and iOS things, so you might have several of them in the sprint. You might want to say, I want to look at anything I need to do for the release, or this push to production of that component with all these stories and bugs fixed, and you can see the progress, how you're doing for hitting that target.
Yeah, interesting. Because I think so definitely our release planning sort of envisions a sort of a cadence-based planning approach. So
it's not at all. Well, it's not some kind of
it's for web nowadays. Teams are looking for continuous deployment, right? I check in my stories, accept it, it's live. And then for iOS, you don't want to do that so much because you have to wait a week for Apple to go down to their level and accept your application.
Right.
And then for Android, it could be quick, but you don't want it too quick because you're going to drive your customers crazy.
Now, is there, whether it's predefined or is there a sort of a natural cadence to that? Are you finding to your releases that literally is coming?
It could be anything. It could be there's a bug that's critical that we want to fix and go through a release. It could be that there's a new feature, we want to release two features together, so we don't want to, even though the first one's done, we don't want to push it till the other thing's done.
And then it needs to be bugs, so it's logical and it can change on the fly. I think the way the way Eric's teams are looking at it, though, they have more substantive releases that last a longer period of time, but then they can have people working on two different ones at the same time. It makes more sense for them to use tags more because they're not doing as much continuous
I don't even want to touch that. Those things
But
are like
they're longer lived, whereas
Yeah.
on iOS and Android, they can make 3 or 4 releases in the same sprint.
But actually, you just said something that made me realize that there might be a way to make this work a little smooth. So iterations and releases don't really tie together directly. So if you have, in this iteration, I've got 10 people, 3 are working on this, 2 are working on that, 1's working on this other thing. Those can all show up in the iteration, and I can sort by the release that they're working on. But the releases will all be going on.
Releases of time are.
But, and the release will be overlapping. So if I want to happen to actually just look at who's working on the client, this release, I can sort that in the track iteration.
Can releases overlap?
They
can, but they're not.
That's my main issue.
Yeah, the guy on Monday said that actually probably you would want to avoid that because it gets a little confusing.
Yeah, so plan. And,
I'm actually just kind of thinking through your question.
So here, I might have an iteration that is this week, but I could have actually 3 different releases happening at the same time.
Yeah.
And then as one goes away, it'll disappear somewhere.
Well, what happens is the release acts more like a filter on the rest of your view more than anything.
Right.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. So you kind of hit the nail on the head. The 2 things are, there isn't a hard link between them. It's kind of like an implied link, So that's why when you select a release, it's filtering the view to say, these are the areas that fall within that release. But, this view, the end result of this view is that for each work product, it's got an association to a release and an iteration, but they are not kind of hardwired together. I could be working on something in this iteration, but it's associated, it's pre-work or it's early work for the next release.
Yeah.
So you can actually set it up that way. I think maybe the problem is really around the kind of the planning views and the kind of.
Yeah, what confused me is that when we did the planning, we were on Plan, and Justin came in for planning last week and said, oh, you pulled from the release backlog.
Yes.
Not from the left-hand side. So I figured, why is the thing I'm supposed to pull for when I plan hidden at the bottom of my window instead of clearly on the left-hand side where I can drag it into individual sprints very obviously?
But if you're planning for the 2.0 release or something, it's going to probably have this feature. So these aren't planned. You don't want them for anything. These are the things you don't want the iterations are going to be.
Yeah, so maybe we're on the wrong page. Maybe we don't want to plan the plan. Maybe we're trying to plan this iteration. So what we're looking for is a list of stories that are ordered by most important by the product owner, the current sprint, and we want to be able to drag things in until the sprint is full, and so the team capacity is overcommitted, and we say, okay, that's too much, pull this out, pull this in, right?
Yeah, that's what you do. You pull from the release backlog in.
Yeah, so that's the thing that's weird, is I have this whole list on the left-hand side that I'm supposed to ignore.
Well, it's not ignore it. This is the stuff that you don't have in for any release. This is the stuff you want in the release.
Yeah, but I'm planning this iteration.
You can pull from either one.
Yeah, you can.
You can pull some from unscheduled and some from the release.
That's correct.
Yeah. And you can just essentially ignore the release backlog and only use the main backlog.
Okay, so
Which we do in some projects.
So,
So isn't there something substantive that we need to work with Barry on and take offline, or is it
maybe.
something right now?
well, I think there is.
He doesn't show me these reports and then.
Oh, yeah.
I'll let you just to close it. So we're definitely aware that plan page has limitations. And the visualization of where the release backlog is down here, and especially with the large one, is not useful. So we started with an iteration planning board where we're giving it basically a more board-like view. So you've got like your backlog on the left, then you've got release backlog, and then you've got your iteration schedule. And you're doing a right drag, which is more appropriate. So we're doing that for iteration now, and you'll see a release version of that coming out. So we definitely take that kind of feedback.
Okay.
So you'll see. I would like to I'll talk to Justin about this, but sort of do a follow-up, maybe work specifically with your team, roll up some of these integration issues. There's a lot of the tool that I think I'd like to kind of share with you, because I think it will make your life, easier that you haven't
Oh,
spent
yeah.
a lot in one go.
I do not want to cross Joe.
You already did.
I already did. I leave the room. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, yeah, you too. Tom, so much meeting you. Yeah, take care. Yeah, okay. So tell me about, maybe your health is from a health check perspective. What are the types of things you're thinking of? What are the...
One of the things, what Carrie asked me to ask about specifically was, one of the things that she did with Jira was she had created for the management team a way that they could sort of check in on each of the teams. So looking, how is their release going, what are their signed fix rates on their release, that kind of thing. We had standard ones set up, and then we knew as a team what they were, and then we could kind of run them. We don't have, now that we're transitioning into Rally, it's very willy-nilly. So the question is, what should we be putting in place? And we have some standards. So she and I are both program managers, so our thinking is, okay, so how do we evaluate the program?
Sure.
And so that was one main thing, I think.
Yeah, I think the thing with Rally is it's really about constructing a dashboard, and you've got a pretty large palette of things that you can put on that dashboard. So I think there's going to be some kind of experimentation to kind of figure out what are the right things.
So what I guess I'd like to start looking at is what you recommend, or what people, what are most commonly used, and how people are doing it, and then we can certainly take an experiment. People have been doing that anyway.
Yeah, right. And then the second point is that when you construct a dashboard, you can do two things. You can sort of define a single dashboard and then view it from the perspective of whichever team you select. So in this case, we're looking at the shopping team. Or you can set it up where each of the elements of the dashboard actually represents a specific team. So for example, I might have 3 iteration burn down charts, one for each of my teams.
Okay.
And you can put that on a single page. So maybe what I should do is I'll walk you through that, and then we'll look at that palette of apps and components that we can put on the page to kind of really talk about which ones make sense. Because some of the things you hit on were like, the defect trend. So, are we adding more defects than we're closing? Where's the trend of our,
One
open
other
defects?
minor trick, but I was sort of brought up this way for many, many years, is I looked at fine fixed rates, and I looked at lines to cross twice before I released, as just an indicator of the health of and the progress of a product. Not always true, but I'm used to studying how fine fixed rates cross and looking at those lines, and I'm not sure, I haven't found where I should be looking for that so that I can see how that's going.
Yeah.
It was an old boss of mine that existed on that, and through the years I've kind of developed, that's how I generally look at things. So anyway, that's a minor thing. I know that everybody in the world thinks so, although he used to be the VP of engineering here, so I think a lot of the QA team here has that same fine fixed rate line view of the double graph.
Well, I mean, the teams I'm working with basically don't have any backlog of bugs, so there's no rate to look at. So I'm very familiar with that from when I worked in Avid.
Yeah.
We would fix 40 bugs a day. Fine, 60.
So let's see. So what we can do is I'll kind of walk you through how we would create a new dashboard and how we kind of find some of these defect rates. Actually, I logged into one of Rally's teams, so I know we'll have a pretty good set of data that we can pull from. But so the way, so don't be alarmed. I've got like a gigantic menu here because we have obviously a lot of dashboards. So let me, I'm just going to pick one. Imagine this is your or my home page. This is what it might look like to begin with. It's going to be like a dashboard, and then you get this option to create a new page. So I'm going to create a new page.
And you're creating it within search?
In this case, I am. In your case, you would do it under My Home or Track or something. Okay. I did on the search because I wanted one that didn't have one already, just to pull it out.
So I can pick to put my new ones anywhere that would make sense in my head.
Right.
Oh, that's good to know.
Interesting.
Yeah, so in other words, if you've got a view that was more related to planning, you put under plan. If it's more related to tracking, you put under track. If it's purely reports, you put under reports. So you can...
I thought there was some... That's really helpful just to know that.
Exactly, yeah. So if I get a new page, it's going to add to the menu I selected.
That alone's worth the price of admission.
And then under this new page, Health Check, If you are an admin, you do get an option to share it. If you're not, you just won't even see that option. It's going to be purely a personal dashboard.
I don't get to do that because I don't report to Justin.
Yeah, I'm special.
So you might have to get a
Stevie, maybe.
you might.
No, I think it makes sense to control it in some way as we start to get this up, so. I know we're not rushing.
To get started, I would select none for the filter here. We can talk more about that later. I'll edit all that out if you like. Or we can stop recording now. Makes sense.
Yeah, you can stop.
Yeah.
And